All right, sounds good. Thanks, everybody, and it's great to see the incredible diversity of where people are coming in from. Greg, I saw somebody from Brisbane, Australia, which was really impressive to me as well. So, anyhow, my name is David Prescott, and I am coming to you today in place of Joan Tabachnick, my longtime friend and collaborator, who usually coordinates. Okay, sure. Who usually coordinates these webinars. And Joan, actually, at this moment, I believe, is high in the air over the Pacific Ocean, on her way to New Zealand, where she's going to be for a period of time. I sort of imagine her taking off her shoes at the airport and then not putting them back on again until she's ready to come home in a month or so. So, anyway, it's great to be here, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, which is titled Promoting Sex-Wise Parenting, Supporting Parents to Promote Sexual Health and Safety at Home and in the Community by Janet Rosenzweig. And before turning this over to Janet, I want to take a moment and tell you about NERI Press. NERI Press's mission is to share the cutting-edge research and best practices emerging in our field. And for many years, that was accomplished only through book sales. And across the past decade or so, with changes in both the publishing and technology worlds, NERI Press has been exploring what it means to maintain their mission while moving toward a more expansive view of the organization as a means of knowledge dissemination. And with this new goal, over the past decade or so, NERI Press has offered online courses, free newsletters, face-to-face workshops, and most recently these webinars, which feature internationally recognized authors such as Janet Rosenzweig. When seeking to determine the most pressing questions, the most urgent training needs, or the most desired presenters, NERI Press can accomplish our goals better if we have your suggestions and input and feedback. Whether positive or negative, we really appreciate the engagement with you. So please contact us with your questions, critiques, and suggestions. And Greg, with this, I'd like to just do a quick poll question and ask how many people have participated in a NERI Press webinar before? Excellent. So, yeah, very good. As always, it seems to be usually about a 60 to 40% ratio, 60% having been in one of these before and 40% having not. So a special big welcome to all of the newcomers here. Thanks very much. And if you find these webinars helpful, NERI Press hopes that you'll consider becoming consider becoming a sponsor of the series. Like our National Public Radio, it's your donations that help make this series happen. The 2015 and 2016 webinar series is posted on the NERI Press website. If you become a sponsor now and guarantee yourself a seat for every webinar in the entire series, as a sponsor, NERI Press also gives you a free gift of two of our various books titled Current Perspectives and Current Applications. And so and you'll get a personal thank you from me since I actually am a co-editor on those. We also offer we also offer CE credits now. So it's truly a win-win for all of us, and it's your support that allows us to continue to bring these free resources for you. Really quickly then, if I can get my slides to advance, and this is where poor Janet is going to, yeah, here we go. We have learning objectives, three of them, the first of which is to identify key aspects of sexual and reproductive anatomy, physiology, and psychosexual development. We're going to identify the role of parents in promoting sexual health and safety, and we're going to integrate these concepts into preventing child sexual abuse. And so these are some of Janet Rosenzweig's books, The Parent's Guide to Talking About Sex and The Sex-Wise Parent are an expression of Janet's belief in the critical role that parents play in promoting sexual health and safety. So one of my goals, of course, is to get a new pair of glasses before too long. So without any further ado, I'm just going to take a moment and introduce Janet. Janet holds a BS degree in Family Studies and an MS in health education from Penn State University. She earned certification as a sex educator, and in 1978 brought that perspective to one of the first child sexual abuse programs in the country. Dr. Rosenzweig managed child welfare programs in Tennessee and Texas before moving to New Jersey in 1984. She earned a PhD in social work from Rutgers University, which really signals a high level of commitment, and then held high-level positions in public human services and directed Prevent Child Abuse New Jersey until leaving to accept a fellowship to earn an MPA from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government in 2008. So if you're prone to what we call Vita envy, you might want to take a little bit of care from here on out. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Janet, and we'll be here to back you up if anything, if there's any problems. Janet, welcome to NERI.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and it's truly my pleasure to be part of this series. It's an esteemed group of authors, and I want to thank so many of you who joined us today. I come at this topic, as you heard from the introduction, I came into this work as a sex educator back right out of college in the 70s, where with this degree in health and a background working in reproductive health, I was recruited to work on one of the first child sex abuse programs in the country in Knoxville, Tennessee. And, the federal law had just passed, CAPTA, the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, and the first grants were being funded. So I really like to say that I've grown up along with this profession. And in the early part of my work, literally recruited to work on a sex abuse project because I was a sex educator. I knew nothing about child welfare. For the first decade or so, sex education was a critical part of all of our work in sex abuse prevention and in treatment and working with kids and families. And my career took me in other directions in the 90s. As Greg mentioned, I was very involved with government. I came back full-time to this profession in 2001, and I was shocked at how far backwards we had gone around the issues of bringing sexuality and sex education work into our work in child sex abuse. And when I really stopped to take some time to see what had happened, I started to, a couple of things really rise to the surface. We see, for example, a lot of things that happened in the 90s, not the least of which were Megan's laws. And they first passed at the federal level in 1994, and by 96, just about every state had some version of Megan's laws on the book. And that did a couple of things. It really, really raised the bar on the consequences of being labeled a sex offender, but it also gave the public an unrealistic reliance on registries as a form of prevention when registries are not prevention. And we've now got some very good research to show that they have very little impact at all. So there's very good research that makes us wonder why billions of dollars have been spent on registries and the outcomes aren't very promising. And if anybody would like that citation, drop us a note and I'll be happy to share some of that research. We also found that one of the things that kind of took the sex education out of the sex abuse prevention was huge restrictions on how we looked at sex education in this country. Abstinence-only funding first started in 1982. There was a massive infusion of abstinence-only funding by 1996. And what a lot of folks didn't realize, what I didn't realize until I started getting into the research, is that abstinence-only funding was not only going to school districts, but it was also very heavily used by various kind of youth-serving agencies. And for many of us working in the youth agencies in the 80s and 90s, we would bring accurate information about health and healthy sexuality into our work in the youth-serving organizations where we had access to kids in a very good informal environment.
Hey, Janet?
Yes.
Hey, Janet, I'm sorry to interrupt. We did have a request from the audience. I know you don't want to look at yourself in your webcam, but if you could center your webcam, unfortunately, we're only seeing about half of your face. And so it's nice to see
Is this
all
better?
of you. That's much better. Thanks so much. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. That's okay. I got so excited talking, I rolled my chair out of the frame. That's what happened. So you can, hopefully
Nice.
you can hear my enthusiasm in my voice, and I will try to sit still.
Sure.
Thank you for the reminder. We also found that something that had a chilling effect on our environment is what happened to Dr. Jocelyn Elders. Some folks of a certain age may remember that Jocelyn Elders was the eminently qualified Surgeon General under President Clinton, who, while at a national AIDS conference, was asked a question about kids and masturbation, and she gave a very general answer that under some circumstances, if kids ask about masturbation, it's okay to tell them that masturbation, you can't get a sexually transmitted disease. And that one line, about 3 weeks after she said it, was seized on by political opponents of Clinton, painted Elders to be someone teaching kids to masturbate, who was advocating to teaching kids to masturbate, and this eminently qualified Surgeon General was forced out of her position. And that just had a hugely chilling effect. And if any folks are fans of Judy Blume writes very, very eloquently about how the political environment in the 80s really put the chill on being able to speak honestly and openly about sexuality issues in ways that would be meaningful to kids. So one of the results of the changes that came about in the 80s and 90s is that even well-meaning adults stopped talking to kids about sex, and that wasn't always the case. We now know we've got current issues in sex abuse prevention where we have people with an over-reliance on background checks. We've got an over-reliance on child-directed strategies, and we've got an over-reliance on sex offender registries. We have an under-reliance on community and adult responsibility. We've got an under-recognition of child-on-child incidences, and we have an under-reliance on the importance of children having accurate information and language about sexuality as a tool for promoting sexual health and safety. An important part of the continuum of solutions, I believe, is sex-wise parents who know how to fulfill their critical role as the primary sexuality educator of their child. If you could roll the video now. This is not a new idea, and I just want to share with you a little piece of a video that was produced more than half a century ago.
Today, everybody tells us we should talk about sex to our children, but nobody tells us just how.
I'm a coward when it comes to talking about sex with my children. A few bad starts have scared me off completely.
In this film, we are going to discuss quite frankly the things that are normal and to be expected in the development of children in relation to sex. Some of you may become somewhat uncomfortable as parts of this film unfold, but I think if you listen carefully, you will agree that the concepts will contribute to the rearing of a mature person who has a healthy, responsible attitude toward the sexual side of his life.
There are two basic objectives to which we would like to draw your attention. First, note the many things that you should not do because they can be damaging to a healthy attitude. Then note the positive things that can be done to put sex in a proper perspective.
Unless you're an extremely unusual audience, you will welcome some of this help, because most people, parents or young people who are concerned about their own attitudes, have not in their own lives had the opportunity to gain this kind of insight.
I never had a good enough understanding myself to really explain things.
I don't even know at what age to start. When should I begin?
When my kids ask me anything, I get butterflies in my stomach. I suspect my husband does too. I know he does. He evades these discussions like the plague.
Parents don't talk freely about sexual matters with their children. They can't. They've been reared in such a way that it's a bugaboo. They don't have enough facts. Parents don't know when or how to begin. They keep delaying and delaying until a child senses that this subject is not acceptable and turns elsewhere for information, which proves to be misinformation. The line of communication between parent and child is then broken. Fortunately, this doesn't need to be a permanent break if the parent can be taught how to approach the problem. No matter how old the child may be, you can always backtrack. But for the moment, let us assume that you're one of those lucky ones who can begin at the beginning.
So the video that I hope you'll watch when we make the clip available was made by a multidisciplinary group of professionals based out of Notre Dame University, endorsed by every major national religious organization of every denomination, the Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychiatric Association, that encouraged parents to teach their kids about sex and presented ideas with how to teach kids about sex. But I have to tell you, I won't share that entire video because this particular video actually has some video that I think in today's environment might be considered child porn. For example, a baby in a pediatrician's office touching his genitalia with the voiceover telling parents this is normal and something to expect. I think in the 21st century that particular piece might be considered pornographic in certain circumstances, and I offer this as a lesson, as an indicator of how far things have gone backwards, I think, in the last 50 years. But there's critical roles that parents need to play. Parents are less prepared to be a sex educator than ever before. Internet porn is now reaching millions and millions of young people with very, very potentially harmful messages. Internet porn is now considered the primary sex educator of more children than anything else. And children with missing or incorrect information are at risk for abuse, are at risk for getting even more information, and they're at risk for sexually acting out in ways that aren't appropriate to them. All of us in our communities must recruit parents to our prevention team by offering the resources they need to promote sexual health and safety. What are some things that parents need to know? They need to know that their opinion counts. They need to understand anatomy and physiology, and they need to understand the basics of psychosexual development. One thing we know from really good research is that parents consistently underestimate the influence they have on children's decisions about sexuality. The source is listed right there on the screen. That's a very easy report to find. When you read that report, we find parents generally overestimate the amount of information their children are getting from health education classes. So they underestimate how important their kids hold their opinions, and they overestimate what their kids are learning in school. The next couple of slides are anatomical line drawings. So if the sight of genitals make you uncomfortable, just be warned that there'll be some on the screen in a moment or two. These particular line drawings are drawings that I had a medical artist provide because I think they provide the right amount of detail and that can be used as teaching aids, whether you're trying to show these to young kids or to use as other grown-ups. And if you do get copies of the book through NERI, you'll find these drawings, made exactly for reproducing. So, but some of the things that when we're talking about when we're doing general sex education, basic things that people need to know no matter who they are is that both male and females have more in common than dissimilar. For example, both male and females have gonads, which produce the reproductive seeds. In men, they're called testes. In women, they're called ovaries. And in men, while in both genders, the testes start out while a fetus has the exact same tissue, if the prenatal hormones are present, that's going to turn the fetus into a male, into an anatomical male, the structures that would have become the labia or external lips in the female fuse together and become the scrotum in the male. And if you look at medical photographs or an anatomical male, you'll see a seam where the skin actually fused together, and the testicles kind of migrate down the tubes that would have become fallopian tubes in a female, and then the testicles are outside of the body in the scrotum. One of the things that's important for kids to understand is that the scrotum themselves have an important function, that they are a thermoregulator, so that when a male gets colder, the scrotum themselves will draw up closer to the body and keep the testicles at the correct temperature. And if a male gets really cold, the scrotum will pull the testicles up inside the body. Why I think it's important to make these kind of points is because so many kids don't understand what kind of things are happening to the body. And one of the critical things that I think parents can do and need to do, and we can help them do, is to demystify the body so that when they have questions, when a little boy's testicles, come up to inside of his body, or his penis gets a little erection, he understands why they're happening. So from the time kids are really, really young, they can understand that testicles are located inside of the scrotum, that scrotum tighten up when they get cold, and that penises get big when they feel certain things. And of all the points that I'm going to make in our brief time together, the one that I really hope stays with you the most is that sexual arousal is an autonomic response. And arousal, which is experienced in a male as a penile erection and a female as genital lubrication, is an autonomic response to a stimuli that may be a thought, a memory, a touch, seeing something in a visual. And one of the key factors when we're talking about helping prevent kids from either being victimized or acting out sexually is to understand that their sexual arousal is their own business. It's perfectly normal. It's a sign that their body is working correctly. And one of the things that we find when kids have been victimized, because they may have experienced sexual arousal, because they may have experienced even to the point of climax, the offenders can sometimes convince the children that they weren't victimized because their body had that positive physiologic response. So if we start helping kids understand from the time they're really little that this is something bodies do, that penises get big when they feel certain things, and it means no more or no less than getting goosebumps when you get tickled, that's a really important message that parents can help making sure kids understand from a very, very, very young age. And also when I gave the original description talking about the male and female anatomy, I like to talk about what are called homologous organs, or organs that started out as the same tissue in both genders, because we often find that kids that are confused about sex or had some inappropriate or even abusive experience about sex are very, very confused about the genitals of the other gender. So demystifying the genitals for both genders by helping kids understand that there's much more in common than difference can be really, really a helpful way to do that. The slide that I'm seeing on my screen now that I think should be on yours as well is a simple explanation of the female reproductive system. In the interest of time, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with that. I'm going to move instead to the external female genitalia. And that's important as we talk to kids about, healthy sexuality for a couple of reasons. First of all, so many females don't realize that they have three openings into their body. They've got their the anus, which is tied to their digestive system. They've got their vagina, which is tied to their sexual and reproductive system, and their urethra, which leads back to their bladder, which is where they urinate. And from a young age, if kids can understand that there's a urethra, a vagina, as well as an anus, it helps them have comfort. It helps them have some understanding about the different parts of their body. We also can point out with kids there's the clitoris, and the clitoris in the female is the source of sexual arousal and is a source where, if touched in a certain way, is going to make a female have potentially pleasurable experiences again. And this is important to understand, because we find that kids who have been through abusive experiences may not give themselves permission. Well, how could I really be a victim if I felt some kind of sexual response? And the key point is that response is an autonomic response that happens from a very primitive part of the brain. It is not a deliberate response. So important concepts for kids is that, with the reproductive anatomy, again, is the multiple openings. There's not just one, that eggs are produced in ovaries, and that's the same kind of structure where boys have seeds that are produced in the testicles. We can also talk about the menstrual cycle as kids get older, so they begin to understand that what times of the month they might be more likely to get pregnant, which is kind of an important thing for kids as they become sexually active and maybe aren't comfortable seeking other kinds of contraception, but that's another whole conversation. But as we talk about the sexual issues with teens, that again, encouraging parents to be able to talk about with teens, is that arousal is normal, autonomic, and private. That arousal happens to both boys and girls. It's very common for girls not to even recognize their own sexual arousal. When boys experience arousal, they experience an erection. They understand something's going on that's specific to that part of their body. But when girls experience arousal, they may just get kind of a warm feeling down there and not quite know what it is. And one of the reasons why I think that's so important for adolescents and older girls to understand is when girls mistake autonomic arousal for attraction, that can make them vulnerable to predators. And there are predators that are specifically attracted to adolescents. I mean, we all hear about pedophiles and their attraction to kids, but there's other categories called ephebophiles and hebophiles, which are folks that are attracted to, young adolescents and older teenagers. And it's very, very common for young girls who don't understand that it's autonomic arousal to think that they have fallen in love with their teacher or fallen in love with their coach, when it's really just their body having an autonomic response. So it's important in terms of promoting self-awareness to understand that. We also want to make sure that kids know that sexual health and safety includes preventing sexually transmitted infections and unwanted pregnancies, an important thing that parents can share. And we know that girls and boys, that their developing brains process relationships very, very differently. And while the hormonal effect on the developing brain of testosterone is very, very different than the hormonal effect on the development brain of estrogen. And people have written some really very, very helpful things to help us understand that while a girl's body, her brain may be awash in estrogen and feeling very kind of the need to nurture and couple, while a boy's brain is being dominated by testosterone, there's some sexually motivated things happening. And for kids of both genders, the prefrontal cortex, where good decision-making skills are made, is not fully developed until, well into the early 20s. So with really important concept for teens is to talk about empathy and relationship and boundaries, because for so many teens, good judgment gets overwashed by peer pressure, sexual arousal, and it's such an important time for parents to make sure that they're talking to their kids about sex, and not just about the anatomy and physiology, but about that particular family's values. My very strong belief is that parents need to send their kids out into the world with accurate information about sexuality wrapped up in that family's values. Kids want to know about sex. The slide on the screen now is a quote from someone who had been convicted of having sex with kids, who had done his time in jail, who I interviewed when I wrote the book. And he actually made it very clear to me that one of the ways he gained access to kids is by being willing to talk to them about sex in ways that their parents wouldn't or couldn't. So keeping that line of communication open with kids, making sure that parents have the resources, making sure that parents have the information, and making sure that parents have the comfort. And those of us that work in the field of child sexual abuse and work in the field of child sexual abuse prevention really have an important role to play in helping parents get to the point where they're comfortable doing that. We want to make sure, and we want to help parents make sure, that their kids aren't exploited by the fact of their own sexual arousal. That parents need to understand, and their kids need to understand, that sexual arousal is an autonomic stimuli, that the brain, again, might experience such a stimuli from a lot of different reasons, and that the response is present at least since birth, and there's reason to believe that it's present prenatally as well. And then the paradox of arousal, again, is when a child experiences arousal and potentially orgasm, this is one of the more profoundly difficult conflicts they have in reconciling the fact that they've been a victim. On the screen if you're looking at the screen, I know there's a bit delay, in a victim's own words. This is an excerpt from the book called Killing Willis. It was written by Todd Bridges, who many people might remember as one of the child stars from Growing Pains, and he became much more known for his adult dysfunction than for his childhood charm. And he wrote his autobiography, and true story, he appeared on Oprah to promote his autobiography, and she opened the book and asked him if he'd mind reading, and she opened the book to this page. And he was shocked and said, "Do you really want me to read this on national television?" And Oprah said, "Yes. People need to hear this." And so Todd Bridges, as a grown man, almost reduced to tears, read this live on national TV. The impact was profound. Hearing him do this is what reminded me that my role as a sex educator, what I needed to get back on the bandwagon in sex abuse prevention. And I've also since learned that Sugar Ray Leonard, who the Olympic boxer, when he spoke at the first conference at Penn State on sex abuse prevention, Sugar Ray Leonard was also watching this, and for the first time in his life was able to acknowledge his multiple experiences as a victim, really were being victimized, and 40 years after being victimized as an adolescent, after hearing Todd Bridges speak these words, was able to acknowledge that had been true for him as well. There's freedom for victims in being able to acknowledge that just because their body responded in a certain way doesn't mean they were not a victim. I think one of the last points, I'm going to move on here, is one of the other reasons we need to understand sexual arousal is because so much of the sexual abuse perpetrated by adolescents is impulsive. It wasn't like, the predators that we hear the stereotypes about, that they plan and they think and they work. With adolescents, it's an act of impulse and opportunity. They're aroused. They're alone with the younger child. They use the younger child to relieve their own arousal. The adolescent wanders away. To them, in many cases, it was no more than masturbation, yet we've got a child who was victimized. So helping kids understand their arousal is really an important thing, and we can all support parents to become the primary sexuality educators of their kids, to consciously decide on the sexual climate they're going to set in their home, and then to learn to monitor the sexual climate of the organizations that serve their kids. And I have lots of information on these issues, on sexual climate, additional resources for parents, not only in these books, but you'll be able to also find them on my website. And on that note, let me turn it back over to Greg, and maybe we can open the Q&A.
All right,
okay.
Great. So, Janet, that was fabulous. That was really fabulous. So we actually did get we got some questions. I have to say this is a really fascinating group, and I pulled out 3 questions that I have to admit I'm really interested to see how you respond. But again, thank you for being such a passionate voice of reason in all of this. So let's see. The first question, I'll take them in order that I got them. The first question comes from Teresa, and it basically, in essence, she asks, think about foster parents talking about sex in the current environment. And I know you have background in child welfare. Foster parents, I think, really have legitimate concerns about talking about sex education without having been becoming alleged for some sort of child abuse. What are your thoughts? What can we do?
I think I'm thinking back to my very early days in this field when, believe it or not, in Texas, in the heart of the Bible Belt, I was used as a trainer for foster parents. And exactly, when I talk about the fact that this material was par for the course in the 70s and 80s till it died in the 90s, we need to bring it back. I mean, 4E foster parent training money was used for almost exactly the kind of stuff I'm talking to you about today. And I urge you to work with the foster care systems in your state. I've got resources, I've got materials. We start by working with the folks in the system, and then we offer really good training for foster parents on how to do this. This is particularly important for foster parents because we know that oftentimes kids in placement are there because they came out of very, very obviously difficult families, and many kids behave in ways that will push the foster parents and push and push and push till the placement's disrupted. And I've worked with cases where the foster parents were even able to put up with fire starting, but when the kids started acting out sexually, that could disrupt the placement. So when we know we've got state officials that have a vested interest in not seeing placements disrupted, and we know we've got foster parents that might disrupt the placement with sexual behavior, I really encourage you, and I want to, whatever resources I can make available to advocate within your state system and offer this kind of training for foster parents.
Fabulous, Janet. Thank you. So really at the center of what you have to say is a lot of this rises and falls on the leadership, both at a local level and at a political level. So,
let me just add something to that, though,
sure.
Because while it was true in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s that the voices around sexuality education were people coming from Planned Parenthood or sexually transmitted disease prevention, a lot of those voices have been silenced for political reasons. And one of the only voices that still gets to speak with credibility around the need for accurate information around sex for kids are those of us that are advocating for its role in sex abuse prevention. That's been my hat for a couple of decades now, but I'm inviting all of you to join me and recognize the value of accurate information and use your role as advocates for sex abuse prevention to help make sure this gets out in your communities.
Excellent. And so, just if you don't mind, Janet, to the a small point. So one of the first places you might go in talking to foster parents is also to refer them to whoever is working with them on their contract or overall their liaison with the state system to get further guidance. Would you suggest that?
I would suggest that. I would suggest oftentimes states have a state foster parent association, which is run by and for the foster parents. So I would look at both from the foster parents association and the place in your 4E agency and your child protection agency that works with the foster parents.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. And then another question that came in, this one is from Shannon, on suggestions for working with parents who have strong religious beliefs against sexual education.
There is not a single religion in the United States that doesn't recognize the parents' role in being the sexuality educator of their children. I am not taking on the public schools here. I am not taking on the media. My tactic has been to work through the hierarchy of that religious organization and bring the medically accurate, age-appropriate information into that faith-based organization. There may be healthcare professionals that are parts of the congregation. So, as a matter of fact, my books, The Sex-Wise Parents, have been used in reading circles in Baptist churches. So I'm advocating for getting the information to the parents through their civic, social, and religious organizations. I find that the concept of medically accurate, age-appropriate information wrapped up in that family's own values really kind of silences a lot of the objection.
Excellent. Thank you. And then the last of the questions that came in while you were talking, and I see more questions coming in, so we'll get to as many of them as we can. This one comes from Jenny, a very interesting question. How do we communicate the differences in developing brains without also promoting harmful gender stereotypes?
That's a really tough one, and I almost hesitated to go there when I only had 35 minutes to speak, because in a longer webinar, I would have been a lot more gentle about introducing the realities of anatomy and physiology. The realities of anatomy and physiology are that estrogen and testosterone make different things happen to the brain. So if you are in a position where you're having that conversation, I would recommend doing it with a much better introduction than I had the opportunity to do here, and just ground yourself in the facts. Dr. David Walsh's book, Why Did They Act This Way? He writes wonderfully. He's a neurologist, and just read some of how he explains the differences the effect of hormones on the development brain, and just take more time to do it a little bit more gently than I had in this very, very brief. I usually do 8 hours on this topic, so I apologize for taking some shortcuts.
Sure, of course. And I'm going to just take a few questions sort of in the order that I see them coming in, if that's okay with you, Janet. And the first one is another interesting one. You can tell that this is a highly intelligent and very well-educated audience. This one, I'll just read it out loud. In my child sexual abuse prevention workshop, I had a father ask me if his 3-year-old son is too young to discuss the fact that he, the father, is a transgendered man. He and his female partner use correct terminology for for genitals. The child has seen his parents naked, and they are appropriately educating him about bodies. The 3-year-old asked his dad, "Will I lose my penis when I grow up too?" Janet, your thoughts on this?
Well, without knowing that particular family, I don't want to. Sure. I do believe is that accurate, honest information about all variations of sexual anatomy and physiology are important to be able to share with the kid. What we don't want is mystery. What we don't want is misinformation, and we don't want to leave blanks that kids can fill in out of their 3-year-old experience, as opposed to accurate information. So honest answers on the part of the parents to the child. Whenever we're talking to kids about sex, the general rule of thumb is we give them a very, very short answer and then say, was that enough, or do you have any more questions? Long drawn out answers to any questions, maybe more than a kid can comprehend, may lead them to places that they didn't mean to go. So a very brief, concise answer followed up by the question, is there anything else you want to know, can help you get to the place where you're being age appropriate for the child.
Excellent, excellent. Feather, thank you for asking that question. Next one comes from Aaron, who says, and here's a $65,000 question for you, Janet. I'm interested in hearing more about child-on-child sexual contact and how to help protect children from these experiences.
That could be another whole webinar.
Yes.
A couple of things that just some of the broad stroke shortcuts that we use when we talk about that is we always look for a power differential, because there's a huge difference between consensual play and victimization. If we generally have cause for concern when we see a power differential, meaning one child is older, one child is bigger, one child bribed or otherwise coerced a child. So if we find a power differential, we've got a cause for concern that the child who abused their power needs some intervention that may just be as simple as learning how to behave. So, I mean, it's not to get, this isn't automatically pick up the phone and call 911. Rather, it's talk with that kid, find out what motivated them, and do some teaching around why that shouldn't happen. When it's consensual sex play among kids, then we want to get involved and start teaching kids about privacy and boundaries. So in a very big nutshell, the main thing we want to figure out is if it's consensual or not. If it's consensual, we deal with, anatomy, physiology, boundaries, and if it's not consensual, we deal with, helping the kid that was victimized feel that they weren't at fault, helping them move on, and helping the kid that misused their power learn how not to do that again.
Lovely. Excellent. Hey, on a related note, I got another question on suggestions for working with families who have an adolescent within the family that has sexually abused another child and discussing sex within that family.
If there ever was a family that needed to discuss sex, because apparently from what we're talking from, I'm somehow getting from your description that people know about what happened with the adolescent. So it's, when kids have a little bit of information and not all of the information, they're going to fill in the blanks. So if there ever was a family that needed open information about sexuality, one that's already had some kind of, a breach of sexual health and safety, excuse me, really needs to have that. So being, for part of the treatment for that family is helping them all being able to articulate what happened, why it happened, the steps we're going to take to make sure everybody's safe and it doesn't happen again. And we also don't know from just that little brief is what was the motivation of that adolescent. Was it one of those consensual things that got, where the authorities intervened? Was there physical violence? Was it a one-time thing? So without a whole lot of information, folks really need to understand what happened and why it happened. And I don't want to downplay how uncomfortable people get talking about sex, especially talking about sex with kids. For a lot of people, the word sex and kids shouldn't even be used in the same sentence. It's just, we don't cross generations when we talk about sex. I really want all of us as professionals to help understand how important our role can be, helping parents move beyond that and understand that talking about sex is as important as talking about poop and talking about pee. And there's lots of things that we don't talk about with our friends over, that we only talk about at home, and healthy sexuality really needs to be in that category.
Nice. Excellent. Well, then the next question follows right off of that one, which is what age should we start to talk to our kids about their sexuality and their anatomy?
I believe that we start from when we're changing their diapers and, when we're, mommy, when we're touching eyes and touching nose and touching knees and mommy's washing your leg, mommy's washing your penis, that they're, if we treat their genitalia the same way we treat any other part of their body when they're babies, and babies don't have any, babies have no boundaries at all. They come into this world kind of just attached to the people that feed them and hug them. So if we start treating their genitalia the same as any other part of their body when they're babies, as we teach them rules about other things as they get older, we can start teaching them what we want them to know about what's different about their genitalia as they get older. So if we can coach parents to be open and about the sexual and reproductive anatomy from birth on, then they never have to sit down and have the talk. It's always there.
Nice. Excellent. And another important question, and this one's from Crystal. Thank you, Crystal, for asking this one. What about sexuality education for queer and transgender youth, and how can parents be better informed to have these discussions with at-risk youth?
I've got chapters on that in my book, so that's one place where we can start. And now is just such an important time because there's so much in the popular media that the good news is it brings the issues forward. The bad news is there's not always good, accurate information out there. So by those of us that consider ourselves advocates and health educators and sex educators, if we could be as up to date as we can on what we know from the science, we're reading our books, we're reading our journal articles, we're not getting our information from reality television, and infuse that information into the way we work with families in our communities, we're doing an important role as advocates and educators.
Nice. Excellent. And here's another one that's close to home for many of us. Janet, not everybody is as comfortable with this topic as you are. Audra asks for ideas on how to help parents feel comfortable to talk with these kids, or how to get rid of the stigma of talking with kids.
So there's two ways we go about that. There's the head and there's the heart. The head is the kind of things I shared in this presentation. When parents read when we can share with people the results of the national surveys that show that kids place a higher value on their parents' opinion about sex than they place on their peers' opinions about sex, parents are incredulous, but we've got the data to back that up. So we start with the head by helping them understand how important their opinion is to the kids. We also make sure that parents understand how important it is to their kids' health and development that they have this. But then we deal with the heart and the gut, and how do I feel in my gut talking to my kids about sex? And one of the best things that I've found is having parents role play in groups, and if they don't have access to a group, with a friend or a partner. And if parents can actually role play where they throw out, what's the one question I would just die if my kid asked me, or what's the one thing I just don't want to have to say to a kid? If we get through that initial fear by role-playing either with partners or friends, or if you do groups in your agencies. I mean, some of the stuff I have in the book, like questions that parents can ask each other, just practicing and hearing the words and seeing that the sky doesn't fall when they say the word penis or vagina, that, if the kids do ask them tough questions, they can answer it. And the other thing I think that's also really important is for a parent to be able to say to a kid, look, sex is really a very personal and private issue, and I'm a little uncomfortable talking to you about it because it's so personal and private, but it's part of my job as your mom or dad, or, to help you through it. So don't pretend you're not uncomfortable. Just take it head on.
Nice. And there's one question from Douglas that I'll sort of paraphrase, which is, a lot of the parents that many of the people that are on NERI webinars, many of the parents that we work with have very unusual attitudes towards sex and sexuality themselves. Where do we start with educating the parents before they talk to their kids?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book, and why I think, and the parents that came of age in the 80s and 90s, the folks that are parenting now, I maintain had even less access to quality sex information than people my age did, and they're getting bad sex information online. So that's why I think it's so important that those of us that are advocating for sex abuse prevention and sexual health and safety, we get on the bandwagon as sex educators. And a lot of, when you say some of the families you work with have unusual ideas, if it's the first place, we have to make sure they don't have unusual medical facts. So let's separate the medical facts from people's opinions. So, medical facts we really can't debate. If they've got unusual opinions about, right and wrong, that's the kind of stuff we, as long as their opinions aren't harming kids or other people, I'm not sure we can be dealing with them. But so if you want to be a little more specific about the kind of unusual opinions you might be referring to?
Yes. I think, the question is from Douglas, and so I can just speak from my own experience that I've seen. Different parents have different attitudes in all kinds of interesting ways. I think your point about discussing the facts versus the opinions is really, really important. One last question, and then I will let you go. This one is actually from me, which is, Janet, do you have any thoughts? As I'm reading through all of the questions, I am amazed at how many of them, how many of our participants are women. Do you have any thoughts on getting men more involved in sex education and healthy sexuality?
Well, we need men to recruit other men, and we need to do that through the faith-based organizations and the clergy. And we also know from the research that even in, intact families with both a male and a female parent, the role of sex education is usually left to the women. And again, we have to change the social norms about that by making it clear that it's not only appropriate but necessary for men to step front and center. And as we see men getting more involved in some of the sexual assault prevention initiatives, I think we're going to find more men willing to step into the role of making this happen.
Excellent. I really believe in men's responsibilities in preventing abuse. So thank you very much. Janet, those were fabulous answers. I'm pleased that we got through so many of them. I did get a request to make sure that we answered one of the questions that I believe you had already answered, which is a nice segue into saying the recording of this will be available at the NERI-Press.org website in the next several days. NERI Press puts up lots of its former webinars that you can just download and watch for free. It's an excellent resource, so I encourage everybody to do that. Also want to let you know that NERI Press also circulates a free monthly newsletter. We've been doing it now since April of 2008, so coming up on an anniversary. I won't do the math because I'm already feeling a little bit old, but I would really like to invite everybody to make sure that they get this newsletter. Our running theory is that you should be able to read about a recent piece of research through the NERI News in the time that it takes you to have a cup of coffee in the morning. And so if you like this webinar, you can see previous webinars, as I said, at the website, and CE credits are available for all recorded webinars as well. The next webinar is going to be on March 15th, 2016 from 3 to 4 and is a very important topic. It's on family reunification after child sexual abuse, featuring Peter Pollard and our own Joan Tabachnick, who will be back from walking along the beach in New Zealand. And so we hope to see as many of you as we can there. We're also going to be presenting a new series of 3 paid webinars by Dr. Phil Rich on the topic of juvenile sexual risk assessment on May 10, 17, and 24 of this year. The cost is going to be about $60, and CE credits are available. If you haven't seen Phil Rich present, he is really something else, and he is a man that knows, who I think has read every study ever written on the topic of sexual risk assessments. So sorry about that. The place that I really want to close on one is just to thank our sponsors, who you can see here, from the NSVRC to the Center for Clinical and Forensic Services in the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health, or Leo Hoffman Center in Minnesota. These are important people, and really, as somebody who has seen how the sausage is made, I have to say, without these sponsors, I don't know where these NERI webinars would be. So we all owe them a terrific debt of gratitude. You can become a sponsor for $98 for individuals or $250 for organizations. You get a seat at every webinar. This one sold out, and you can get access to CE credits, and you get 2 NERI Press books. And heck, if I see you at a MASOC conference or elsewhere, I will autograph them myself. If you want, you can contact Diane Langelier at the number that you see here for more information. NERI is a fantastic organization, an excellent publisher. I've always said, you've heard the expression that if you really want to find a good restaurant along the highway, go to where you see all the trucks, because the truckers know to eat, where the truckers know the best places to eat. And so it is with NERI Press. If it's where the people who really know what they're talking about in the field go to buy their books. With that, a great big thank you to you, Janet Rosenzweig, and to Greg and to Kristen for organizing all of this. That's it from me, David Prescott. Thank you, one and all. Take care.